everyone, welcome to the Iterative podcast. My name is Inez, and today I'm joined by the general partners at Iterative, Brian and Hsu Ken, and today we'll be discussing an often untold story about running a startup, Burnout. Prior to diving deeper into discussion, could you both briefly introduce yourself and your experiences with startups? And maybe we can go in alphabetical order. So, Brian, please.
All right. Hey, everyone. This is Brian. I've spent the past 15 years of my life running and building startups. Ended up doing two with Hsu Ken and then the last one by myself and co-founders. The first two companies, one was a e-commerce company. We built it for 5 years, sold it to eBay in 2014. Second company went through Y Combinator, and the third company is backed by Andreessen. I think that's basically it. Maybe we can dig deeper during the show.
So very similar to Brian for the first two companies. I'm originally from Malaysia, but grew up in the US. Brian and I started two companies, and then I moved to Singapore about 3 or 4 years ago. And we have been running Iterative for the last year. And I think we've done two batches and invested in 16 companies. So excited to be part of the ecosystem here.
Cool. Thank you for that. So let's just dive right into the conversation. To begin with, what is burnout, right? Burning out is a deeply subjective experience, and there's just multiple ways to describe it. For example, the World Health Organization has defined burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by three dimensions. First, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. Second, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job. And third, reduced professional efficacy, or to put it more simply, burnout can be a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged stress or overworking. As founders, have you experienced burnout? And if so, could you share what that experience felt like?
Yes, definitely. Probably multiple times. And I haven't heard that definition that you just gave about burnout before, but I feel like it is like exactly what it's like in all three buckets. So I think when I've experienced it, it is those three things. So, it's like harder to get up in the morning, and you kind of just dread going to work, right? And things that you used to think were kind of fun are like not that fun anymore. Um, and so I think the first time I experienced it, and Brian, I don't know if you remember this, but we were at Decide, and remember when I was the only designer and like product person there, and we had like 20 engineers, and I basically couldn't make product decisions or design things fast enough, and I was like holding back the whole team, and I was just like trying to work harder, and basically Brian, my brother and his brother, pulled me into a room, and we're basically like, you have to hire somebody. You're like holding back the whole team. And I was like, no, I could just like work harder. And they're like, we don't want you to work harder. Like you need to bring other people on to do it. And I think I experienced kind of all three of those things though. Like it was just like painful to get up. You were not having fun doing stuff. And then I think the thought of doing more stuff was just like, was painful. And I think the outcome ends up being that you as a person just become more irritable. And so I feel like Brian would come to me and be like, hey, we should work on like whatever. And I was just very irritable to it. Like, I just like got very annoyed by that because I just felt so kind of like, I guess in retrospect, kind of burnt out anyway. And I guess the other part to this, which we can get into a longer conversation about later, it seeps into your personal life. At least for me, Brian, I don't know what your experience is, but it like starts seeping in. It's really hard to compartmentalize burnout to just one part of your life. So that was quite challenging. Bima, do you remember that at Decide? Me going through that part?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
I didn't just make that up.
No,
what did you notice on the flip side of it? Like seeing me?
I think it's the same thing, right? Where it's kind of like it's very clear that Hsu Ken was working really, really hard, but like nothing was getting done, right? Like absolutely nothing. And so the incremental like hour or couple hours that he's putting in is not equaling like results, right? It's actually kind of like backtracking. And so, yeah, I think it was very obvious. And I think, I don't know, as the person who's burnt out, your initial inclination is just to work harder, right? That's how we've been taught to do things. And so you're almost like digging yourself deeper into a hole. And so, yeah, I think we're going to get into this, I think, a little bit, but like it's really important to build a support network around yourself because it's hard for you to catch it.
Bima, what was your experience?
I didn't know if you wanted to go into like my extreme case.
Let's go there.
So I'd be very surprised if no one's experienced this. I think it's just like nobody talks about it. I think the most extreme case, and it didn't hit me that it was so extreme until I went to the doctor. So I was like super stressed out, working super hard. Like my hours were insane, couldn't get enough sleep, and I started having panic attacks. And I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And the first couple, I was like, if you've never had a panic attack, you don't realize what you're going through. It's so strange. I think it might be different for everyone, but for me, I think I was just like, there's like random pain all over my body that's like not real. I don't know, at some point I felt like I was hallucinating, also not real. And so I started going to the doctor. And then he was like, you really need to get your like stress under control because I think it's all in your head. So I think that was the like extreme case for me.
Brian and I weren't working together at those times, but I would see him like randomly on calls, and I don't think I'd seen him like look worse. Like it was like clear. It was like clear that like something was
Right.
happening.
You also mentioned the fact that this burning out bled into other aspects of your life, right? How do you reckon burning out affected your wider network, including your startup?
I was kind of maybe prone to burnout because I kind of like believed in the like myth of it, right? So when I got into startups initially, I was like, oh, the people who are going to be successful are the ones that are willing to sacrifice more than other people. I just like internalized this thing. And so to me, it was like the more I like pushed through and kind of suffered stuff, that just meant that I was going to be more successful later on. So I think two parts. I think maybe I'll talk about the professional part first. I mean, I think typically if you're a designer or a product person, you're kind of sitting in between all these groups. And so um, my being burnt out just made it so everybody else like couldn't do their jobs in the way that they wanted to, and so the company kind of ground to a halt, just waiting for me on stuff, and I wasn't willing to kind of like ask for help or hire more people, and so I think literally the company's output was just a function of like my output, which is not what you want. So I think the company was going much slower than it could have gone. So I think that was the company part. For the personal side, look, I think when you're burnt out, you're just like not a very pleasant person, if you're being honest, right? Like you're not pleasant to other people. And like, I mean, it's not pleasant being you in those moments. And so I think even outside of work, I just was working crazy, crazy hours. And so any kind of like relationships outside of work were kind of taking a backseat to that. And then when I was spending time outside of work, I just felt guilty the entire time because I had some sense that I was holding back the company. So anytime I was with friends, I was like, man, I should be like working right now. So when I am working, I kind of like am not very happy because I'm like trying to do this thing and it feels terrible. And then when I'm not working and trying to take a break, I feel guilty for not working. And so I think it just feeds into itself, and it's just like this perpetuating part where you're like never happy. Um, and so yeah, I think it was just kind of a bad time all around. I mean, I've definitely lost like romantic relationships over it too. So I think it's just hard to be so unhappy in one part of your life and for that not to affect other parts of your life.
I don't know if I have anything else to add. Like, I just think it gets magnified when you're in my position, right? I was running the company as CEO, right? So it's like you're really holding back the company because you're indecisive. You can't get anything done. Everyone's like depending on you for kind of like key, I don't know, obstacles to break through. So, and then on the personal side, I feel like I just don't have friends in general, so like that never never came up. But like I was married, or I'm still married. Jessica's great, and I don't know. It's the same thing, right? Like in your marriage, you get like way too irritable, so everything's bad. You're I don't know. I think it's the like you're now very alone, which kind of like gets to you a little bit. And then it was hard for Jessica too because she had to like constantly check on me to be like, are you okay? Is there anything I can help you with, etc. So
Right, I can completely resonate with the experience of isolation because I mean during those moments, right, you're in a sense there's this misguided equation of work, time, and the worth and the quality of your work, right? And there's a certain romanticization of productivity, which I have internalized for the longest time, and I've yet to decouple myself from it. To be honest, I'm not too sure how. And so perhaps this is a good segue to talk about mental health, and perhaps, I mean, how do people approach this perhaps culture of burnout and mental health in the startup scene? And of course, it's important to caveat this question by saying that you both have worked in various different countries, and it's not possible to generalize all these experiences, right?
Yeah, and I think I think context has a lot to do with this, right? So, Brian was born in Hong Kong. I was born in Malaysia, and so we come from kind of Asian cultures, but we kind of grew up overseas, and we've worked in kind of different places. I think, I think that's a big topic. Before I actually get into that topic, I had an interesting thought, which is I think the thing about glamorizing hard work is it comes from an early age because I think when you're young, people try to get you to work hard, right? And so they're like trying to build this part up. And I think okay, there's definitely burnout in school, but I think for a lot of people early in life, working really hard in that kind of burnout actually like serves them well in the short term. Like you get good grades and you do well on tests and like all of this stuff. And so it teaches you that like this works and that it's like something you should do, right? Um, and I think that's kind of insidious. And I think it's not. It's like later on you kind of see how kind of like how bad some of these goes. But I think there's something kind of like interesting about earlier on in life. It kind of like pays on some level to be this way, and it encourages you. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, yeah, certainly agree. I think the other way to see it too is like nobody teaches you to take a break.
Yeah.
Because like when you were growing up, right? It's like I don't know. I was playing video games, right? I was always sneaking out to take a break anyway. And so when you're kids, I think it like play is like part of what you do, and you like seek it out. For me, I think the biggest change was like after I graduated and started working, like play just like went away. And so, yeah, I was like, I don't know. I think I worked very hard to make sure that I wasn't like playing video games all day long so that I was being productive. And so it just like, I don't know, exacerbated what was already kind of like an issue.
Right. To extend what Sukin mentioned at the beginning about this having perhaps coming from your childhood or at least a younger age, and for me personally, like mental health and just your mental well-being was not part of my daily discourse, whether it be in the home or at school. So it was never something I prioritized. I mean, the top of my priority was always work, and of course that comes with a lot of sacrifices, right? And yeah, I guess uh, given that we've spoken about signs of burnout, what were the ways through which you overcame your burnout or still try to this day navigate it?
So I dug in a little bit into this when I don't know I was having issues. I don't know if this is clearly not an expert on mental health, but this helped me kind of like articulate what's important. So from what I learned, I'm sure there's way more, but like I had 5 areas of like mental health that I was like looking at. The first one is physical. Everyone understands physical because we're all like taught to like eat healthy and like move around, which I still don't do on a daily basis. The second thing was like intellectual. And the way that I understood intellectual was you have to figure out how to give yourself creative outlets. So you're always like learning and stretching yourself. The third one was vocational, which is to me it means kind of like mission or impact, which is working on something that actually like matters to you. Fourth one is social, which is kind of like having this connectivity with like other people, which I'm still working on, honestly. And then the fifth one is emotional. And the emotional thing, I think we're like starting to teach ourselves how to do this. But the closest thing I can articulate is like being at a place where you're grateful uh, and you are caring about people other than yourself. And so I think when I was growing up, I I didn't have all those like areas mapped out in my head. And so what I ended up doing was I just gave myself scores on all of those and realized they were really low. And then figured out how to kind of like increase each one of these. I don't know. It was like a very engineering way of solving things.
My way for avoiding burnout, I think, is similar to Brian's. Is it's like it's very engineering, which I think maybe this is just the way that Brian and I kind of like think about stuff. Um, I think it's much better to avoid burnout than have to deal with it. So I think that's like one point. So once you are burnt out, I think it's like quite challenging to kind of like come out of that. And Bima, I don't know if you kind of like agree with that, but I feel like if you're trying to avoid burnout, you can. There's everyday things you can do. You can build a system around how to avoid it, and there can be like subtle changes to kind of help here. But if you're already experiencing burnout, you kind of have to make a very big change to get yourself out of that. And I think oftentimes that is I think people who are really burnt out oftentimes change, like they actually just have to like change jobs, right? And they have to like stop working or change jobs and they remove themselves from that environment or like something needs to happen. And so I think, dealing with burnout once you already have it can be potentially kind of like quite a big change. For me, on avoiding burnout, I think it's similar list to Brian, but mine is I think remembering that you have agency, which means that like you're in control of this, right? So sometimes I think when I've had burnout, I felt like a slave to my responsibilities. Like I had no choice here. Like I had responsibilities. I need to do those responsibilities. And I think the first step is remembering that there's something you can do. Um, the other stuff I had was you want to build a support system. So I think Brian has a similar thing, right? So this could be other founders, friends, partner. But I think a really underrated thing, and it can be potentially expensive, but finding a coach or therapist to work with, I think is like invaluable. Um, I have personally found that having like a dedicated person to talk to about these things and it's literally their job to do this, is a much kind of like healthier way for me to kind of like talk about those things rather than if I talk to a friend about it all the time, I feel bad because I feel like I'm unloading on my friend and they have their own stuff and all of this. So I find just like talking to a professional is just helpful. And they often have kind of advice and frameworks on how to do this. They work with a lot of people on this. So I think for me, that's part of building a support system. Um, I also try to figure out how to like turn it off. And I think the idea of rest is a little bit different for me. I think of it as more as like recharging. Um, I found that not all activities kind of like recharge, like give me energy in the same like way or capacity. And I think it's different for everybody. So finding the things that you really enjoy and then being able to kind of like spend time working on those, I think, and doing those things are important. I think some people it's like exercise, like some people like it's cooking or like whatever it is. But I think it's like finding, again, this is like a very engineering approach, but finding the thing that is the highest leveraged like activity or like thing for you, and then making time to kind of do those things, I think is really important. So just like learning what those things are, and also like time of day, I often think about quite a bit too. Like how do you just like make this easier on yourself, right? Like can you just do more of the work in the mornings, this kind of thing. Two just tactical things if you're a founder working on this. um, I think the thing Brian and I definitely didn't do a good job of our first time around, but honestly, even now, there's just this general idea of like you probably just need to prioritize better to do less, right? Like on some level, I think founders, especially first time founders, feel like they just have to like there's so much stuff that they have to do, and they drive themselves crazy doing this. And I think oftentimes there is a subset of the things that they think that they need to do that is like really high leverage and that they need to do, and then a bunch of it is like actually stuff that is not as important. And if you can just work on prioritization, which I guess is like a whole nother podcast I guess we could do on like how to prioritize stuff. But I often think about like just doing less stuff and just higher leverage stuff. And then I think the other part here, which Brian and I are kind of like working on now, is like hiring. I think first time founders probably like there's this notion of like you have so much to do and hiring adds more work in the short term. And so you're just like, oh, I'll just like grit my teeth for the next month. And then you like do it for the next month and you grit your teeth for the next month and you just never get out of this cycle. And so I think just tactically for founders, it's like, work on the prioritization, and then kind of like work on the hiring part. So that was kind of the list for me. Bima, do you have any takes on the priorities, the hiring part? I'm sure. I feel like we went through that like very strongly in all of our companies.
I mean, totally. I think it's very natural, right, to get, or sorry, maybe the way I think about it, right, is like there's two patterns you're looking for when you're burning out. The first one is you like wake up every day, right, and you're having a bad day. And there's two versions of this in my head. The first version is you're waking up every day and not liking your work because it's just dull. It's like boring. You don't get stimulated, et cetera, et cetera. Which, I mean, there's ways to like correct that. The other one that I think Hsu Ken's talking the most about is every day feels overwhelming. So there's like too much to do, or the tasks are like really challenging. You don't even know how to start, and you're having like multiple days of this. So the hiring comes in because you basically can like offload stuff off your plate, and then the other piece that Hsu Ken's talking about is like working on the most important things and giving yourself permission to not work on anything else that's not the most important also helps a lot. So I don't know if that was helpful, but that's what it triggered for me.
I just want to emphasize one thing that I'm actually working on this now that Brian said was there's always so much to do, and I think at startups, I think having a building a feedback loop for yourself here is really important. Like you're just gonna constantly feel like there's too much to do, and you're gonna do your best to like do as much of it as you can. But oftentimes you're not sure if you're making any progress or like what that progress is, and so I find for myself. Um, a fair bit of kind of like planning around like okay, here's what I'm going to like want to accomplish like today, and then like you can feel good about accomplishing those things. So setting these kind of small milestones, so I'm like doing the same amount of work, but I have this feedback loop around like and it gives you this feeling of making progress. And I think oftentimes like that just makes kind of all the difference, is like feeling like you're making progress. I think and there's just lots of ways to kind of like set this up. But I think that's really important. Bima, have you kind of spent more time working on that?
100%. Me and Hsu Ken actually have like every single week we check in. We're like productivity nerds, right? And so we're like, oh, what did you do last week that worked, and what did you do last week that didn't work? Do you want to do like a quick fire things that we end up doing? Okay,
Yeah, let's
so
do it.
I mean, I can start. So I mean, for me personally, I found out that like spending 20 minutes planning my day really helps, right? So like, what are the like top one or two things that I want to accomplish today? And then I schedule them into my schedule, and if I accomplish those two things, I just let myself say it's okay to stop. And so that's been really helpful for me. And I think what Hsu Ken started doing is he just has like concrete stop times on his day, where again, like a lot of this is just like giving yourself permission to like not think about work at all.
Yeah, I just find that if I don't give myself structure, it just bleeds into everywhere. And so I've just given myself like concrete start and stop times. And the trap that I was falling into before was I would always like during the day, I think I would be less productive because I'd be like, I'll just work late tonight. Right. And so you're like, you kind of procrastinate during the day or whatever. And you're like, I'm going to work late tonight. And working late at night for me is painful. I hate it the entire time. For like whatever reason, I just like hate it. And so I think I just the more I do it, the more I like dislike my job. So I set these kind of boundaries, and it just forces me to be like, okay, I'm going to be like really focused in these times because like, and I don't deviate. There's like no time afterwards, so I don't allow myself to fall into the trap of like I'll do this later. And then I do a similar thing to Brian. I think planning is like super underrated. And time boxing stuff is underrated. So I literally like from the start of block to like the end, I kind of like plan out like, okay, here's the things that I kind of want to work on. And I think your brain fundamentally works in two ways. I think there's like a planning, critical thinking phase, and then there's like an execution phase. And I want to get out of I spend time in that planning kind of like critical thinking phase of like, okay, what should I do, prioritizations and all this kind of stuff. And then once I have the daily plan, I like turn that off and I'm like, my job today is to do these things. That is like it. I like do not debate whether these are the right things anymore. I do not debate any of these things. Like your job is to get these done. So I think that switch happens, and then at the end of the day, when I like finish all of those things, you just feel like good. You're like, I said I was going to do these things, I did these things. I'm gonna like, and actually I started having a start up routine and like an ending routine to like mark the like start of the like workday and the end of the workdays. And the like end routine is like the best thing in the world because, and it's like, it's silly. I literally like put stuff away on my desk. I like shut everything down. I like put my like notebook away. I like put headphones away and like I like closed. I have like a second room where I'm like working out of. I like close the door. Like that's my like I'm like done with this. And I just think that stuff helps you kind of compartmentalize and kind of fight burnout and stuff. So these are some of the these are the things that I've kind of been like trying and kind of working on.
The one when Hsu Ken told me about his new like startup whatever end routine, the one thing that I thought was non-intuitive is when you know that you need to end at X time, you just like are very productive, right? Because like you have to like cram everything in because you know you're stopping, and so I don't know. That's helped me quite a bit.
You know where that I got that from, Bima?
Where
Founder friends who have kids. They were like, they're like, I don't even, I have no choice here. Like the kids are gonna come, like I have to go pick them up, and it's like you cannot tell. Kids don't care if you have a deadline, right? Like they just don't care. To them, it's just like their mother or father like doesn't want to play with them, and so they're just like, I have a set amount of time when my kids are at school, and I have to like do my job within that time. Otherwise, like there's no hope. So I was like, oh, that's kind of like a useful forcing function. So when I've worked with uh, like people who have kids, they the lack of procrastination in their day is like admirable to me. Like they just don't have time. They're like they don't want to like talk to you. They're like, I don't have time for any of that, right? Like I got to be done by this time because I got to go pick up my kids. So I was like, can I borrow some of that? Two additional tips that just came to mind here. I haven't started this yet, but I was going to write as part of like my end routine is actually a reflection on the day, like a few sentences of like, do I feel like it was productive? I was actually going to give it a score. And I think primarily I want to build like a daily feedback loop so I can look over back on the week and be like generally good or generally bad. And I can find out like kind of debug why that was the case. And so I think that's like one like a reflection kind of thing would be interesting. Brian and I both played around with this tool called Sunsama, which basically is it merges a task list and your calendar. And so you can drag tasks onto your calendar. So it pulls all your Google Calendar stuff, but it also you can drag tasks on it. And the whole idea being like, rather than being focused so much on task lists, be focused on like blocks of time and how you plan your day. So rather than like at the beginning of your day, you have this huge task list and you have no idea whether you have enough time for it. It's like you're dragging stuff into your time. And that helped me initially get started with the like, I start here and I end here, and then how much like stuff can I fit into that? And I think that's a tool that I think people have kind of been pretty. I think has gotten a little bit more popular, but most people I don't think hasn't known about it yet. Wait, Inez, wait. What is your take on this? Because I feel like
parting thought.
you recently graduated, right? And so I feel like you are probably in a similar frame to a lot of people that are like listening to this podcast. You recently graduated. You are a self-proclaimed person who is close to burnout or are prone to kind of like burnout. What is your? How do you kind of feel about it? What's your experience with it?
I mean, personally, I think my focus is on preventing burnout such that I don't experience it to begin with. And I think that's just honestly my constitution in that I am fairly chill, in that I don't take things too seriously, and my ethos is sort of things will be done. So there's really no reason for me to stress over any particular activity, right? And I don't hold things to heart oftentimes, so I move on from things. But in the cases where I do feel as though I am burning out or on the brink of burning out, I think for me it's important to have someone hold me accountable, whether it be like friends or a therapist, to sort of keep me in check and be like, Inez, you need to do nothing. Just do nothing. I think I mean, personally, I still have a very difficult time doing that because you know me, productivity, and still it's a work in progress to de-link myself from that mindset. Yeah, so I think it's about having people keep me accountable and for me to actively carve out time to do nothing and just enjoy myself. And a large part of that is also to have a schedule, to keep me on track. I mean, I guess from that conversation, there's quite a few actionables, right? On the last note, it seems like having someone keeping you accountable, whether it be your co founder or your kids, is a very effective way to sort of organize your day, right? The second thing is to perhaps acknowledge your strengths and weaknesses. And one funnel of doing that is through hiring, right? Recognizing that, hey, there's somebody else who could probably do this for you instead of having that responsibility all to yourself. The third thing is to just simply plan your day, have a set list of things you want to do and complete and stick to that list. The fourth would be to cultivate work-life separation, which is not the easiest of things to do. And the next would be to create a feedback loop, to measure progress and to keep on track and to not sort of go overboard unnecessarily. I guess to end off after like very very useful tips, what would you have done differently, if you go back to when you first launched your startup? How would you have approached work and productivity thinking back?
I mean, on some level, I feel like we're still dealing with this, right? It's not like Brian and I have like magically figured this out and we're like, oh, we're like gurus at this and we don't like worry about this all the time, right? Like we still, this is something we're still working on. I think maybe specifically for listeners who probably are often kind of like first time founders and thinking back to my, when we were first time founders, I think the thing I think about a lot is this difference between first time and second time founders is when you're a first time founder, I go back to this prioritization thing. It's your first time. And so everything seems really important. And you like can't tell the difference, right? So I remember when Brian and I first started, we like spent a bunch of time on like legal incorporation. Like I think the first thing we did was like incorporate a company or something like that. We like spent a bunch of time on this. And the second time, I don't think we actually incorporated the company until we had like 100,000 users or something like that. Like it was like we were just like yeah, then like don't worry about that stuff. Um, so I think first time founders, since they have a harder time prioritizing, you make up with that with just like energy, like you just run yourself like to death. And I think when you're a second and third time founder, you're like, yeah, legal stuff, don't worry about that. Honestly, like logos, don't worry about that. Swag, like whatever. Like even like product stuff, you're like, yeah, who cares about a polished product? Like it's all about distribution. So I think you're just better at prioritizing. So I think if I was a first time founder again, I would maybe kind of like take that to heart around how to think about what stuff really is high leverage and kind of focusing on those things. And maybe there's a part of it too. The imposter syndrome, I think, is quite strong when you're honestly. I mean, Brian and I are like third time founders, but like I still feel imposter syndrome. But I think when you're a first time, you feel it even more, and so you you want to do a good job in all of these things, and so it's harder to like put out a product that kind of like sucks, and so you like kill yourself to do this. And I think Brian and I now, like a lot of the stuff we like, if we were building products again, they're kind of terrible, right? But they get the like one thing right. And so maybe my advice to first time founders is like think really hard about how you're spending your time and like where to spend that time on the highest leverage things you can, which again, this is like a whole nother podcast around like what those things are. But I would probably spend a lot more time thinking about what I was doing, rather than just like doing stuff.
I mean, I have the exact same thing, but I want to come at it from a different angle, which is the most important thing. If I were to go back to my like 20-year-old self, right? The most important thing I would tell myself is like, be mindful and like start looking at how you spend your time.
Mm,
Uh, the way that I now do it, which I wish I did it before, is like I literally just look at my calendar and I'm like, okay,
mm,
cool. Like here are all my hours. Were they productive? Did I enjoy that like hour that I spent? And then I actually think Hsu Ken's thing is really important, which is like, did I feel like I had control? Did I have like autonomy over this time? And I think when you go through and you can like audit your week like that, it's just so enlightening because like the time that you spent just tells you like what is important to you. And so yeah, being mindful about how you spend your time, I think, is the way to, I don't know, make sure you're spending it wisely. I have one more thought I want to share. I kind of feel like most things, I don't know. Okay, this is new, so I'm just going to try it. Like most things that are feelings, right? They're actually okay for you, right? They tell you things that allow you to change your life. The thing that I can, the feeling that I most, I don't know, resonate with here is anger. Like anger isn't innately bad, right? It's a signal that like something is wrong. You need to like change something about it. And so burnout to me feels a little bit like that, where it probably is signaling you that like you're not working on the right thing. You don't think that the thing you're working on is important, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't know, just kind of like a parting thought for this podcast is think about burnout as a opportunity for you to readjust, kind of like the things that you should be working on or that are important to you. And so maybe it's a good signal for us to make these changes.
Just to add on to this, because I had a recent experience with this. I think I was feeling quite like just behind all the time. And I remember talking to my therapist, and basically she was like talking about like, I mean, feeling behind is a feeling, right? She's like, are you actually behind? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, okay, so you just feel behind. And I was like, yes. And that basically was a signal to me that like I needed to kind of find, like, I needed to kind of like figure out whether I was or I was not. My default was just that I was, right? And I think some people, if they didn't know whether they are or they are not, they could default to like, they don't feel behind. But my personal kind of like default is to that I am behind. And so I think that was like a helpful thing to me of like this feeling of like, I think to like Brian said, like recognizing that this was actually like a feeling and then trying to kind of like see what that feeling is kind of like telling me and then kind of like acting on that.
Yeah, so I guess self-reflexivity, checking in on yourself daily is very important when it comes towards identifying your emotions and actively trying to do something to change it. You know, and
I feel like that's the easiest thing to not do when you feel busy.
yeah,
Like when you're busy, that's like the first thing you like stop doing, right? You like stop exercising, you stop doing this reflection stuff, you just like stop all that stuff.
yeah. So it's an active process that it's hard to sort of de-link from if you've been socialized to think of a very particular way, right? Yeah, but I mean, here's to taking on these tips and improving ourselves daily. But I think that's it for today. Thank you again, Brian, Hsu Ken. Unless you have any other questions you'd like to ask or answer.
No, thanks for setting this up.
Thank
Very
you.
looking forward to many, many more of these episodes.
Me too. Great. Cool. Thank you.